Hello and welcome to another Wednesday, to another edition of We Are Developers Live. We don't know what to do with our time, so we thought as well, we might as well go online and talk about some things. This was a new intro. I didn't even see it before, so that's it sounded a bit like the band in a cruise ship, like on the bar to get you into the mood for margaritas. So that was pretty cool. And the good thing about today is we have a guest, and we have a guest that I've been working with for a long time, a long time ago actually, Brian Rountree. He's been with us at Yahoo back then, and he was a counterpart of us while I was in the UK. He was actually in America and doing all the things that were released rather than the things that we wrote. And it's great to have him around because we wanted to have a bit that he posted later on in detail. But as he's already here and not showing up like 5 minutes before speaking, we might as well get him into the whole mix. So Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you for having me.
So you were at Yahoo, and then you were at HP, and now you're at Monta. Or was something else in between?
Oh yeah, no, I was after Yahoo, I went to Rackspace, and then I was at Hewlett Packard. I did a brief stint at AWS for a while, and then sort of bounced around doing consulting gigs for companies that wanted to replace their monoliths with microservices. And then the pandemic hit. And I wound up picking my family up and moving to Spain to work for Glovo. And that was what got us to Europe. And then about a year ago, I joined Monta, which is based out of Copenhagen.
And what's Monta doing?
Monta is a SaaS platform that allows large charge point operators to manage charge point infrastructure for electric vehicle charging sessions. So everything from managing load balancing the grid, to power management, to payment, to getting access to roaming networks, and allows companies to better monetize their charging infrastructure.
Well, that's great because I mean it always cracked me up. Like when I moved from England to Germany, and everybody was ranting about like electric vehicles because Germany is a car country, and we only do like the proper petrol ones. And everybody's like, oh, well, I can't buy an electric car because there's no grid. And then there's no grid because nobody has electric cars. So it was this like chicken and egg problem. And now we got like 2 charging stations in my street here, but nobody has an electric car because they're not affordable in Germany. But it was interesting to see that we finally have that. And I remember there was this great documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car years and years ago, which talked about these Saturns in the 90s in California. Because there was the first electric car back then, and they already had the grids up on every Fry's or any other store where basically you could charge in. And then after 2 years of basically getting those cars and being in the contract to actually lease them, they all vanished, and people were asking themselves what happened. And then they've had some PBS show about construction sites, and they saw like 50 of them being demolished in the background while the car company was pretending that they gave them all to universities for research. So that was an interesting one, seeing that back then the car company said like there's no moving parts, nothing's breaking, so it's not really working for us. So we actually took them off the market again, and it's now we're in a different situation. Personally, I'd like cars to be unnecessary, but I don't think we're going to be anytime in that direction soon.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit odd that so we've opened a Barcelona office, and we're staffing it up with engineers and support people and sales folks in Barcelona. And it is funny to work for a company that is in the business of moving electric vehicles forward, but not owning a car myself and living in a city where not owning a car is sort of the norm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you need engineers, there is a certain company that can help you with that. We can talk about that later. I mean, there's this job board in Europe, biggest one. I don't know who it is, but it's somebody there. So we wanted to go quickly to today, a bit quicker to today than last time. So let's take some quick fire news. Let's talk about some things that happened last week. And if you haven't seen the show before, or you haven't been part of this, we're actually taking all the things that didn't fit into the newsletter on Friday, and we have a quick conversation today. So as I'm collecting about 150, 160 links a week, it just basically feels always like, oh my God, I didn't talk about that one. So one of the first things we talk about is the Stack Overflow stats, and I found that really interesting. There was basically a person that is basically a 1% top 1% Stack Overflow contributor, basically talked about how the decline of Stack Overflow was happening. And it turns out that basically since ChatGPT launched, there is 76.5% fewer questions being asked on Stack Overflow. Do you see that yourself as well? Did you stop using it? Do you use ChatGPT first, or do you still look up Stack Overflow or other resources?
Is that to me or to Dan?
Brian, whatever. Who's
Okay.
faster? Who's going to
be? I had never really been much of a Stack Overflow user, but certainly with tools like Cursor and Copilot and ChatGPT and having direct IDE integration certainly made it irrelevant for me to have to alt tab over to a browser and open up a new tab.
Yeah, and it felt the same to a degree, because Stack Overflow, the best result was the most upvoted one. It wasn't necessarily the right result, but it was the one that was the easiest or simplest to understand. So it feels like the same of like hitting I feel lucky in Google or getting the first result from ChatGPT. So Dan, what was your interaction with Stack Overflow? Did you ask questions? Did you answer questions there as well? Or do you think that decline is also not only the asking, but also people interacting with it because they feel like their knowledge is being indexed by ChatGPT and they don't get anything for it?
Yeah, I feel like it's all of the above, really. I think that even though Stack Overflow is and was great in many ways, it can feel very messy because, like you say, you've got these upvoted answers, but then you've got all the other data that's going with it. And now we know that all the other answers to go with it that are probably wrong. So it feels like a very indirect way, whereas like you're saying, Brian, when you've got it in the IDE, it feels like you're going to get a more direct answer and that you're going to get to the place you want to be quicker. I don't think it's surprising, and I don't think it's the end of the decline, really. I think it'd be interesting to see how this looks at the end of the year, because it seems that up until this point, it's been pretty consistent. They've done like a month by month breakdown, and I don't think there's any anomalies there. It's just declining every single month. So yeah, let's see how that looks in 12 months.
When at our event, they released and said we're going to have our own AI client in there and stuff, but it seems like nobody bothered. It seems like it went down like a lead balloon, which is kind of sad. But it's interesting if it can recover from that, or if it becomes obsolete, much like Quora and others became, or Yahoo Answers, if I remember that one. CDN first is no longer a performance feature. So that was interesting to hear, because basically back in the days we said let's put everything on a CDN, because then it's going to be sent from as local as possible to your end user. But it seems like with the double keyed caching that Chrome has now introduced, and Adi Osmani gave a big thing in there, and I think also with HTTP2 it became less of a thing. Do you see that as well, Brian? That you face that in your job right now as well? I remember in Yahoo we started that whole thing. The whole performance group was talking about these things with YUI back then. But do you think the feature of hosting it yourself with the infrastructure that we have in general is enough, or do CDNs still make a lot of sense?
I think CDNs still have their place. Honestly, I think most of the performance problems that we see with front-end applications is no longer the fetching of the files. It's all of the kind of overhead that comes with React and overhead that comes with all these other frameworks, and the managing state, managing the initial page load. Honestly, I think that back in the day, the groundbreaking stuff we were doing about bundling CSS at the top and concatenating your JS at the bottom and delivering by a CDN, honestly, is kind of long tail stuff at this point. It feels like, in terms of most of the application, at least the runtime stuff in a heavier web app.
Well, it's also, back then there was also first criticism that that's a single attack point as well. Like if the CDN endpoint gets polluted, your machine gets malware from everywhere. So it's an interesting bit to see. I think it would be interesting to talk to people in Africa, talk to people in Pakistan, India, and those places if their CDN difference there still makes a lot of sense. But I think in general, it's like owning the thing and bundling it and deleting what you don't need might be the faster way and better way to get performance out of your apps. Grok may soon get an unhinged mode, and AIs will increasingly attempt shenanigans. I found that interesting. Dan, you commented on that one, or you asked people about what they think about the unhinged mode. What was the result of that one?
I feel like it's sort of pandering to the little corner of the internet that we know Elon Musk likes to sort of pander to, which is that kind of edgelord 14-year-old boy humor, which, is often about sort of creating very controversial memes or, kind of making jokes about very dark topics and the whole freedom of speech debate. It seems like they're kind of trying to package all that up in Grok and create a tool that allows people to create at a very opportune time as well. It's 5 days before a new president comes in, and they're seeming to want to rush Grok through to this stage where everybody can use this unhinged mode. I assume just for the memes. And then the other part of the kind of debate, I suppose, is this one that you're showing now, the AI increasingly attempting shenanigans, and it takes more of a sort of engineer's approach to looking at it. Of why will AI continue to make these mistakes and make these strange decisions? Because of how it's built, and it's an unavoidable thing. So I think it's a lot of that really can be wrapped up as just AI causing trouble and AI behaving badly.
Well, Google and Microsoft just announced a Gen Z voice for Copilot as well, and that for some reason has like Chinese sentences in there every fifth or so. So it feels like, Brian, do you think this is like a technical companies trying to be like, hello, fellow young people, what are you doing?
I mean, every time I see something like, we're going to specifically create an AI model to allow people to create controversial memes, are we really creating a specific model for that? Or are we just removing the guardrails from the models that already exist, right? So most of these models have been trained on, at this point, this sort of recursive loop of meme culture and other AI content. And at some point, if you're a real company that wants to use the benefits of AI in a real way, you're just going to have to start hosting and training your own data and not relying on any of these public models. So, well, unhinged mode, just to me, when I read unhinged mode, I just read, oh, so you're just going to get the actual model instead of model plus moderation.
Or maybe it's not a model, it's just Musk typing himself. That might be the other option that's basically there. Or they get like the worst people on the planet. I mean, we said last week as well. It's interesting when you see how much of the meme culture was like wrong answers only to things, and that all got indexed and not necessarily as a wrong answer. So that's another interesting, scary thing there as well. So it's it feels. It goes together with the fact checking being thrown out and saying like we're gonna make community be responsible for saying things are right or wrong. I'm scared shitless of that, I have to say. It just feels like a really cheap way of saying like we don't want to be responsible, because I've never seen a community police itself successfully that became huge. Did you, Brian?
No, I mean, this is with the rolling back of the DEI kind of stuff, with the removal of content moderation. This is the return of the angry tech dude, the sequel, right? So I think for a long time, Silicon Valley went out of its way to try and say, hey, we are leaving this tech dude bro image that we had in the past and see, we want to be open and inclusive. But the tech dude bros never went away. They all got into positions of power. And to me, this just feels like, the return of the tech dude bro culture.
Shame. I thought they're gone, but they're not, sadly enough. This was interesting. A misconfigured license plate scanners. And I mean, this has been going around for a while. That basically was just a database that got leaked before. But basically, people showed in a YouTube video how you can hack license plate readers that are in like, I don't know where they actually are. In Europe, we don't have them. Where they monitored in America, like I think it's just bridges and stuff where you paid beforehand, or
sometimes in many busy traffic intersections where there will be people who will like try and jump the light, they'll take a picture of the license and then mail you a traffic ticket.
Okay, so basically then in 20 minutes it was like 1,000 vehicles got leaked because of somebody managed to hack into that system. So yeah, public cameras, never a good idea. I still have access to the UK ones because I worked with the Met Police at one time, but they never shut down my API access. I could have done some horrible shenanigans with that one as well. But it's just amazing how much data actually gets recorded and not secured. And that's an interesting read on that regard as well.
Just to jump in on that one as well, Chris, that's the timing of that is that I think 2 days ago, the Prime Minister here in the UK said that he plans to take the country to try and be, a global leader in AI. Don't think that'll happen, but also that part of doing that is about installing AI cameras across the nation that will be there to pick up potholes so that we can kind of identify them and, get rid of them and fix them quicker. Obviously, that was met with a lot of calls around surveillance. And then you see stories like this where, data is being leaked, and you think, well, these cameras will be picking up loads of number plates all the way around the country when we've already got some more CCTV in London than sort of any other big city on earth or whatever it is. So I think it's an interesting time, but it's quite scary, really. It feels a little bit like the surveillance state through excitement around technology and being able to put in some of these surveillance tools, along the way, really. So just wanted to add that bit of context.
Which is fascinating, because I remember when I lived in London, every 1st of May, when the whole demonstrations were going on, none of these cameras worked. So what the police do to demonstrators was never shown. So that was an interesting bit. And the other bit was the potholes, because I remember Fix My Street was one of the first social media things in England where people took pictures of potholes and sent it online and shamed their council to actually fix it. And I mean, there's videos of people celebrating the birthday of the pothole in their street by like putting a slice of cake next to it, because for years and years the council hasn't done anything, and now he's making this one of the bits in the election. It's an interesting.
And are we really sure that we need AI to discover potholes? Because like the elderly people who complain about it aren't complaining fast enough. It seems like we have a pretty effective reporting strategy for potholes already, and that's people who drive over them.
Yeah, we don't need in Germany either. We got like grandmothers and fathers with like their pillow in sitting in the window and complaining about people parking the wrong way as well. So I think there's already an infrastructure that we could tap into, rather than just building a new infrastructure for it. But yeah, it's an interesting bit that cameras everywhere is always seen as like a security thing, but it can also be like a insecurity thing rather easily. The apps that are spying on your location. So basically, this was a hack of or a leak of a company that actually recorded location data for others, and it turns out that tons and tons of apps on your machine, Gravy Analytics was the name of it. Tons and tons of things on your computer actually leaked your data, which I found interesting with Candy Crush. And I mean, dating apps, Tinder, I kind of understand how that would be interesting for them to know, but like MyFitnessPal and like and others, it's weird that so many things record your location. And when I worked on Firefox OS, that was one of the things that always drove me nuts, that every app that I install on Android or on iOS ask for every permission when I install it. Like, I'm like, no, this is a calculation app to do house pricing. Why would you need my heart rate? Well, maybe when you look at house prices, but it's a really interesting thing how many of those are actually recording your location. I think, Brian, in your case, it makes sense for your customers to have location data, but it feels like that there is an overabundance of apps that listen in on us on those things.
Well, and you have what I think that the thing to remember there is that for a lot of these people, the people who built My Fitness app were clearly relying on libraries that they were using to do things that they didn't want to have to code up themselves. And if you actually go up the food chain to some of these mobile SDKs and stuff, you'll see that like it very well possibly could be that the people who are building this app needed an easy way to upload profile pictures, and they found a library to do it. And that library also included a whole bunch of stuff to do things like location tracking. And because if you're a library maker, you want to build an SDK that lots of people are going to use, so you build in a lot of functionality to it. And if you're an amateur app developer who doesn't necessarily understand dependency management or, what you're actually pulling into your project, you could be inadvertently pulling in stuff that you don't need. That's the optimistic view of it, is that the folks who are building, the MyFitnessPal app just needed a way to like put your swole image for your thumbnail in there instead of like tracking which gym you were at.
Probably that's an interesting point. It's a very interesting look on it. I mean, it's also here that Candy Crush cracked me up. Like, I didn't know it was still a thing. but it seems to be still a thing. And I think a lot of people ruined themselves with Candy Crush back in the days as well, because they paid upgrades and stuff. It doesn't die. Have you ever played?
Mother-in-law needs something to do when she's watching her shows, right? So Candy Crush still has a valid play in the market.
Well, maybe make better shows that are more engaging, so we don't need to play games while we're watching the shows. That might be the other option, but yeah, it's a weird one. The people should own the town square. This is basically the guy that built Mastodon, who now said, like, okay, following the whole thing with Meta, I don't want to be the single person reliable for Mastodon. And he said, like, there's going to be a non-for-profit that actually he hands over Mastodon to, the Mastodon.domain, the branding and everything. And he just feels like it. It could be like that he doesn't feel like doing it anymore, or it has more transparency. Dan, you pointed out yesterday in our meeting something interesting that said, like, that these systems might not get as much adoption by people because they want to have one person to own it rather than like what he's doing right now. Do you think this will be even more detrimental to Mastodon as the confusion of what it is already?
It could be. And I mean, I don't want it to sort of sound like I'm defending that single person ownership, because it's completely against what I would, believe. But I do think there's something to be said for some people look to something like X, or they look now to Meta, and they see one person owning it, or they see a lot of power in the hands of one person, and they might feel a sense of security that there's at least a captain, running the ship. As we said, it's usually at the moment a white man, and that's obviously, got major issues related to it. But I think it's unfortunate that something like Mastodon that is so decentralized and is built with that in mind actually can lose out by doing that, because in theory it should be better for all of the users. But I guess it also comes down to where you sit in that debate around, capitalism. Do you feel that one person running a company will get better results than a co-op, for example? So yeah, it's unfortunate, and I'm really glad to see actually this move by Mastodon, and I'd love to know what you guys think about it, because I think you probably both use it more than I do. But it's very interesting.
I think it matters a little bit on the edges, right? Like it'll be an important thing for people who care a lot about it to either invest more into Mastodon and use it more because they're handing it over to a nonprofit. It will also be used as a ding by other people like on the fringes, because they'll be like, oh, nonprofit, so you're communists or socialists or blah, 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 blah. So I think on the edges, it's going to matter more. I think the problem Mastodon has is it's an incredibly crowded market run by a very small number of 600-pound gorillas, and it's a difficult market to crack, right? So I'm not sure that having this big altruistic push around having it be a nonprofit. I mean, this could also wind up going the route of Mozilla, right? Like Mozilla is a nonprofit, and it's the 6th most popular browser at this point, right? So, I think it's going to matter on the edges, but I don't think it's going to make a difference in the market in general.
Well, it's interesting because PixelFed is now basically an Instagram alternative that a lot of people are flocking to. So that's basically feels like a new Blue Sky thing, and that's only since yesterday. Like, it basically in China and in other places, people use it instead of Instagram. And when I tried it out this morning, the first option it told me to log in with Mastodon, which I didn't even know was an option for a lot of the other things. So that was an interesting idea to see. With Meta going the way it is, that people go away from the other products like Instagram and WhatsApp. But
I mean, you have to remember that our community is still relatively small, right? Relative to the user numbers that we're talking. So, I mean, when we say a lot of people are going away from Meta, at the end of the day, it's a rounding error, and all of our parents are on Meta, and all of our aunts and uncles and grandpas, and that combined user number is way larger than the invested, interested, more technical. Yeah. Now, I do think that those platforms have a problem with young people, right? With the upcoming, I think in the next day or two, it could be that TikTok gets banned in the United States.
Yeah.
And there's already these movements around to this other Chinese app, and there's all these viral videos of young people in America who are like making video content and learning Mandarin at the same time so that they can use this new platform. So I do think that the legacy platforms have a problem with the young people. But in terms of like the numbers of aunts and uncles and grandpas and grandmas out there, they're not moving off of platforms like Meta.
Well, it was like that when we were in Yahoo. We always were going for the teenage market because they're the ones that spend the most money. But when I remember as a teenager, I had a different favorite band every week. Like, and it seems to be the same with apps these days. Like, I don't really care about them anymore. What I found interesting was the difference between TikTok for Chinese teenagers and TikTok for American teenagers, because there's a lot of like educational material on TikTok in China and lots of random horse shit, the AI generated stuff in America, or like addictive stuff, like like these kind of things. So that was an interesting thing. There was also the post that TikTok is selling to Elon Musk, which turned out to be like fake. But yeah, it's an interesting bit. But yeah, the logging in with Mastodon, logging in with federated content, I don't see that going anywhere where people are technically non-versed, because it just seems to be too complex. And Dan, you agreed with that when you tried it, right?
Yeah, I do find it too complex. I think it's really unintuitive, and it complicates things by asking you about servers when you're so used to this way of thinking of, well, I just want it to be at mastodon.com or whatever it is. So it's just fundamentally, it feels like it's out doing something different, but actually by doing that, it's harder to use, and that makes you not want to use it. That's why I never really adopted it, even though when I went back to what I said at the start, the values of it completely align with me. So I think if I align with its values and I still don't use it, then there's plenty of people that are in a similar position.
Well, the other thing is, of course, there was this Free Your Feeds campaign, which is basically that was a response to Meta's changes, where it says like save social media from billionaire capture, and it's a lot of people from Mozilla and other like for good companies, and the author of the Filter Bubble book and stuff. I wonder if it's actually going to make a difference. What are your thoughts on that, Brian? Have you looked at that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the news that came across it. It seems like Blue Sky is having its moment, right? And maybe it's the one that'll get some market traction and sort of take off, whereas Mastodon has that problem with like dealing with servers and the distributed nature of it, where maybe Blue Sky. But I mean, the worst thing that can happen to altruistic efforts is those altruistic efforts suddenly find themselves sitting on a pile of cash, right? And yeah. So maybe it's because I'm just an old cynic at this point, but I'm not sure that rich people telling poor people that the even richer are the problem, and then using that to generate a funding model for, like, I don't know. It just, we'll see how it plays out. But
it also is like the where does the money go and what do they do with it is something that it always fascinated me when I worked at Mozilla and I saw the CEO salaries compared to what we had for the community. It felt like not the right way to go. But that said, I'm trying to get a few of those people on the show as well and actually talk to them. I mean, Robin, I know quite well, so it will be interesting to see where that came from and what it does. But the mid-level rich people telling the others are the problem is a very interesting aspect that you brought up there. So that's something I can throw at them and see what they think of it. But yeah, I mean, it's at least there's a discussion. So I think that's a good thing. So that was basically the quick fire round, which we didn't do too quick, but we already have more stuff to talk about. Dan, JS Rising Stars. This is not a JavaScript like Snowflake the other way around, but this is about like the survey about like what are the most successful JavaScript thingies. You looked into that. What was the findings that you wanted to share?
I think nothing too surprising, right? I think we often see in the JavaScript kind of ecosystem these popular things that are talked about, whether it be from things that just pair with it nicely, like Tailwind, or of course things like Vue, Next, etc. So there weren't any huge surprises in terms of where the popular, what the popular technologies were, but I was slightly surprised, and I think you were as well when we spoke about it, seeing ShadCN as the most popular UI component library, because I I have an issue with its name, and I know that is totally unrelated, but it's meant that I haven't really looked into it too deeply and actually looked at using it. Personally, I use Tailwind because the name looks very strange. I can't figure out if it's the name of the person who's made it. It doesn't mean anything to me, but it's hugely popular, obviously, by looking at this. And I think that this just gives us a little bit of a snapshot of, what's generally popular in the ecosystem. The only thing that did jump out at me, though, and I just find the category where it was, front-end frameworks, HTMX as number one. I don't know why that surprised me. I think personally, I've not looked at it very closely. It never really gets talked about. It almost gets talked about in a slightly jokey, memey kind of way, as some way that back-end developers can finally make websites and make them look half decent. But I don't know enough about it to really know if that's the case. But it surprised me a lot to see that above React. Is there a reason? Is there a skewing in the statistics that's causing that to happen?
I wonder if that's just about the metric, that they look just how much increase in stars it had, and it is newer. So probably it got more stars because it's a new thing. So comparing that with the age of the product or making a mean out of that one would probably be a better way of measuring it. I agree. Like, a lot of people look at HTMX and I liked it when it came out. I liked the idea of just it had that jQuery simplicity to it, where basically it gives you like two-way components talking to each other with HTML attributes. So it feels like Angular without being for old people. And it's just a very interesting, different approach to the. I guess the freshness of it would be that it takes away with all the, like, here if you set up your server and you have to use the debugging tools of the framework, you have to do that. It's all like HTML and JavaScript, and you can use whatever browser you want to do with it. So you don't have to subscribe to the React world if you want to use HTMX. But I haven't used it in earnest yet. Brian, what are you working on? What are your products built on?
Our products are actually, our app and our web front end are built in Flutter. So we actually have one of the largest Flutter applications around for our customer facing stuff. Of course, our backstage stuff that we build internally, we're building in React. But yeah, we went with the Flutter route on our front end.
Okay, that's interesting, because I mean, I've seen it getting a lot of attention a few years ago, and then it kind of went away. There was also a thing about Swift right now, where people complaining a lot about the language itself being destroyed by Apple because of decisions that in the syntax that the community doesn't agree with. So Flutter seems to be like the cross-platform mobile thing that a lot of people forgot about.
Yep.
But yeah, so
well, I mean, it's so the Flutter community is, I would say the Flutter community is small but zealous, right? So
yeah. Cool. So these are the rising stars and things. So yeah, it will be interesting to take a look at more closely how these things were measured. If it's really that something new gets more stars, is already a winner, it seems to be a weird thing to me. Because we also saw in the last show, we talked about all these fake stars on GitHub that people buy. So it feels like, yeah, it's like, hey, we got more internet points than you that don't make any sense. So that feels like a weird comparison. Let's move on to the Chromium bit. I mean, this was a meme that was going around for a while, where it says, like, we got browser diversity is basically open source Chrome, crypto Chrome, Chinese Chrome, Microsoft Chrome, and not Chrome. And it doesn't show actually Safari, and it doesn't show Vivaldi and the others, but it feels like there is a big issue with it. And now with Google being maybe forced to actually sell off Chrome, that's a big issue, because we so much is dependent on it. And so that's why there is a Chromium development fund, and the Linux Foundation stepped in and took part of it on. And then it actually shows like which supporters are in there as well. That also ties into the whole concept about Electron, because Electron apps are built on Chromium as well. So basically everything that is related to this, if Google were basically to pull out and have to pull out and say, like, okay, we're not supporting Chromium anymore the way we did, because but you don't make money with a browser. A browser is a means to an end to show people ads or to sell your services to people. So Google owning the browser market was great, because they're an ad company and they're also a search company to a degree. and that's how they made their money. But now they basically get forced in the whole monopoly debate to actually sell off the browser. Maybe it's not 100% sure yet. I think this is an interesting one to see where the Chromium can go, but I don't think there's any other way. Brian, you talked about earlier that Firefox is like a 6th most used browser. Is browser diversity over? Have we lost that fight?
I mean, it's been over for years, right? Like, I don't know where. Like, I started seeing Opera ads on YouTube and stuff about 8 months ago because they mashed a bunch of AI into their browser, right? And they had this whole campaign about how it keeps them safe and helps them shop and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, it seems like the browser wars died a long time ago.
Well, Opera is a different one because they got sold to some Chinese money lending company in between. And then the Opera GT was like always flagged as malware, and it was sold as the gaming browser, whatever that means. But then again, Dan, you're using Arc, and it didn't work with your microphone. That's why this time it's much better. So
yeah, it's definitely got issues. It's fancy in that it's got some, you know, slightly different ways of doing things, but I'm definitely seeing the drawbacks. And people told me that I would, you know, people said, yeah, you'll use Arc for a few months and then you'll start to find the issues, you know, like the floating window when you're watching a video that just gets in the way. And then, yeah, the major issues with video. But I can't say that it's very often that I actually come across major differences. Quite a lot of the time, if I move to different browsers, most things feel like they can support, you know, a range of browsers a lot better than they used to, at least. But yeah, there's definitely still those issues under the hood, right? And they're pretty big ones. Like I just fundamentally cannot use Arc when I'm doing video.
I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding that we've been fighting for since 1997, that people just don't understand that, no, it doesn't have to look exactly the same across every browser. But it's still a thing that people try to do, and it feels weird that we don't understand that. Like, yeah, I have a mobile browser because I don't want these six different rows to show up. I want a different interface on that one. So it feels like with the framework dependency, like ShadCDN and these kind of things, or like when Bootstrap came around and everything looked the same. It feels like we've given up on like trying to give end users the best solution possible for the device they're on, and just give one for each of them. And I think that ties back into bringing the web to the app space. Is this something that you miss, Brian? Because I remember we spent days like making a rounded corner work across all browsers, right?
Yeah, I don't miss those days. Those first couple of releases of the YUI library, where the designers at Yahoo decided that every tab and every page needed a tab interface with a gradient and a text flow and a text shadow and an AJAX search response, and it was, yeah, the rounded corners, and I don't miss any of that. I mean, to this day, I think Ted Drake and I had a brief we had a brief 3-piece punk band in San Jose that we called Box Model Hack. And at this point, like most of the engineers and developers at this point that I bring that up to, they don't even remember the Box Model Hack, right? And so it's at this point, it's just one of those like grumpy, like man yells at cloud things where it's like Box Model Hack, and people are like, what? So yeah, I don't miss those days at all.
What was the first album? Was it called Has Layout?
Has Layout equals 1.
Wow, Zoom 1. A lot of people basically start talking about the agentic web. Like basically we're going to have AI models do all the stuff for us. And that's a tool that I threw over to you, Dan, to take a look at, which is an AI browsing framework, Stagehand, that people keep talking about. Have you taken a look at that? And what was it about?
Yeah, so I've checked it out. I mean, you can see, going back to the naming of things, I love the naming of this, right? So it's kind of to go in partnership with Playwright. So they've called it Stagehand. So I thought that was a really nice way of kind of situating it. It looks interesting. I think the sort of marketing videos they've made for it are pretty impressive, because they're about a minute long and they get quite a lot done. But I'd have to sort of know to use it for myself, you know, if it can quite do what it says. But it's interesting because I think what it's trying to do is show us that we can do more complex things, and hopefully the way that we actually write the syntax and do that is even more towards natural language than you would think it would be. And I think this is a really good example of it, because you can do some quite powerful things where you can effectively automate entire workflows, you know, throughout the browser. And they've got some sort of listed at the top where on the NPM, I think actually that's where you are. Yeah, just on dark mode, it looks different to me. So the idea that you've got the, you can go to a website, fetch a load of data, bring it all back, and then present it, running it through an LLM to sort of interpret it or parse it in different ways. It feels really powerful, and the API looks quite simple, the way it's broken down into just 3 simple sort of blocks, if you like, of anything to do with actions, anything to do with extractions that you want to do, and anything to do with observing any of that. So it's interesting, but I'd have to really kind of give it a go to see if the demos that it shows you, they look really impressive, but then how does that actually look in reality when you're using it? So
the most American demos ever, isn't it? Like, go to Hacker News and get the first 10 results, because that's where tech people are. Log into Amazon and buy something for me. I'm scared shitless by that kind of stuff. That sounds to me like somebody writing a loop and ruining me. And then go to
and at the end of the day, at the end of the day, they're not going to, like, this will go nowhere unless you can actually have things like row level security and other things, so that like an enterprise could use this to automate. Like, I'm a business analyst at random company X, and I have these 12 Google Sheets that I need to, consolidate into a set of visualizations for a slide deck I'm doing, but it has to have security context awareness. Yeah, like there's plenty of things. Like, you can go to Cypress right now and do these exact same things by just, building up a go here, click this, go here, click that. So, I mean, until these kinds of toys have some level of security integration, they just remain toys.
It seems like to me user testing or automated UX testing done with an extra level of like do it on other people's products rather than your own. But I mean, if it makes it easier, I mean, Playwright, I mean, there's also the thing in Chrome now that you can actually edit things, and you can actually record things when you're doing it. You play it back with the developer tools, and that feels the same way. Like this, there used to be an extension called Aardvark where you can do changes to the DOM, and then it would actually create a bookmarklet for you to do it. That seems to be like that on steroids. So interesting, but take a look at it. Next tool that I have for myself is basically Explain Shell. That is we can quickly go through that. I really like it because it gives you a shell command and it actually explains to you what each of the bits do. And I think this is really, really good because, I mean, a lot of people actually see shell as still something like the Matrix. And of course, there's great chances to shoot yourselves in the foot with it. But it's interesting that also when somebody says, like, just do this to go to this page, paste it in there, and then actually click on it and say, like, okay, explain that to me in proper language, what it means. And so you're not actually hacking yourself. So I think it's an interesting little thing. GitHub Copilot does a similar thing. I think probably Cursor does similar things as well. So if it says, like, explain to me what's there, it's just beautifully done. And I think it's something that we should all have our tool belt from time to time. CSS variables editor. Did you take a peek at that one as well?
Yeah. That came along at a really strange time, actually, because I was solving an issue where it reminded me quite how useful CSS variables are, and I think this is why this project needs to exist. So I was trying to solve an issue where I needed a load of color values to be generated on page load from one color. So I basically needed a sort of root color, and then I needed to use HSL to create loads of different variations of that all on page load, and then sort of store them so that I could use them throughout loads of different pages. And I started doing it with sort of databases, and then Tailwind ran into some issues because it needed the complete hex code or the HSL passed in. It can't do things on the fly. And then I thought, CSS variables is going to be the easiest way of doing it. So then finding this project, I'm going to use this right away. Really, really good. It's just kind of added this UI editor basically so that you can see what the CSS variables are on a given site. You can go in and edit them, and then you can take snippets of code away from that. So you can plug it back into your project if you want to, and also generate new palettes using the kind of existing variables that are there. So I love any kind of color tools. I've got some of my own out there, but I just love anything that allows developers to take some of the burden off of these visual things that they may not enjoy or be good at, or sometimes they just want something to look nice and do it quickly. So yeah, I love this. I think it's a great tool and built by one person. So always nice to see.
I think it's interesting because that's the kind of thing that browser makers take a look at and then basically make it part of the core. And of course, I mean, the extension I'm still worried about because I started to hate extensions with a passion because there's serious security performance problem most of the time. But in this case, it seems to be like early days. But this is the kind of stuff that the developer tools could get inspired by. But having worked on the Edge developer tools for 8 years, it's just really, really hard to get these things rolled out. Like when you point out, like, one person did that in a day, why doesn't like 50 people in Microsoft can do that in a day as well? Because you just answered your own question, because 50 people stand in each other's way and they're actually allocated to other bugs that need fixing rather than just like putting these clever things in there. But I think it's really good to see that kind of technology being shown in more of a visual way. It's interesting when you just talked about HSL, because Brian might back me up here. Like us as old CSS people were just like, oh, what's that about? Seems like we're falling behind.
Yeah, I mean, I at least know the acronym, but yeah, way back in the day, I think some of the first style sheets we were writing, we were literally using system keywords for colors. We didn't even get to the hex point yet.
Oh, wow.
Which in high contrast mode things is still necessary. So there's still interesting world out there where we need to have those. VLC, I'm just going to do quickly because we're kind of running out of time. It's got 6 billion downloads, and it now has a new AI generative tool that actually generates subtitles for you in different languages from the audio file. So you don't need to pirate subtitles anymore like everybody did, like at opensubtitles.org or other pages that you shouldn't click. And I always loved VLC because it's like this like it does everything, and like it plays everything on every operating system that I had. And when I went from Windows to Mac, it was basically my go-to tool as well. It felt like IrfanView back then, that actually was an image editor that basically showed you everything. But an interesting thing, there's a researcher who used to be in Microsoft, a security researcher, and she's now Laurie Kirk, and she's now at Google. And she basically points out in her thing just how attacked VLC is because of its usage, and how insecure it is to a degree because it grew out of proportion. And it makes you wonder if that AI generation bit is going to be a next attack vector. That's why I reached out to them, and I'm going to have them on the show soon as well. Because I think it always felt like anybody who has to do anything with pirated copies of movies will have VLC on their machine. The others will use the video player of the operating system because it played all kind of weird formats that was there before. But it was interesting to see that in the Bug Hunter's Diary, in the book, it's like the first demo is like VLC had that for years. And I didn't know, for example, that a year ago there was a security flaw that actually but by badly written subtitles, you could actually get a root access and execute things on a machine. And that feels like, whoa, I didn't know that could go in there. So that's an interesting read about this. But in general, I think the idea of VLC is great because it was also at the CES show right now. And they had a booth there where they showed those subtitles, and everybody who went there like, yeah, what are you selling? And they're like, nothing. We're open source. You can download the thing for free. So it was the only booth at CES that was really pushing open source out there. It's an interesting company because they're French as well. So at one time they were illegal to use in America, I think, because it cracked DVD regional encoding whilst playing.
So at one point, I think VLC came bundled with like FFmpeg and a couple of the other sub libraries, and those were the ones that could crack so they had to actually split those out. And so then you had to download like the VLC source code, and then you had to download a whole bunch of add-ons to it to be able to actually functionally do anything but play like AVIs and things like that. So yeah, but I always thought that an interesting attack vector to get on a lot of machines would be to go through one of like those FFmpeg libraries or one of those other libraries that a bunch of video players would use to do, because at the end of the day, the MP4 file format is it's a folder that assets get put inside of. It's not the actual video itself. And so the very nature of that file format leads it sort of completely susceptible to do nefarious things.
But so is AVI and MKV. So they're all container formats, or ICO for a degree. I mean, like path icons are an attack vector. It's interesting.
I'm learning a lot.
So let's come to you, because you posted on LinkedIn those things like random WhatsApp scammer. Do you have a website with a form that wants to collect data? How nice. Let me introduce you to my friend Python.
Yep.
So what was that post? What was that WhatsApp?
I was never a user of WhatsApp before we moved to Europe, but we moved to Spain and everyone here uses WhatsApp. Like even businesses use it because of the way that the telephone system works here in Spain. A lot of businesses will have like a phone number that starts with 9, and they actually have to still pay like a phone bill every month for that. But you can set up your WhatsApp business, and so I downloaded WhatsApp, and almost immediately after I downloaded WhatsApp, I started getting random spam and random like scamming attempts. And so, when I had downtime and some random scammer would message me on WhatsApp, like my first way of going about it was I would just interact with them a lot, figuring
Why?
I know this is a scam, but the longer I waste this person's time, the less time they will have to potentially go after someone who might be more susceptible. So I can just ask stupid questions, send them memes, and go halfway down the trail and get them really frustrated and just see if I can just waste a bunch of their time. Of course, that encroaches on your actual life, so eventually you stop doing that. But there's a relatively new-ish scam that's circling WhatsApp where they will try. I guess they're mainly in Spain because I think that they're preying on young people, where Spain has a pretty high youth unemployment rate. And so the scam is essentially you'll get a text message on WhatsApp asking if you want to earn some side money or a side hustle by liking and interacting with content on the web, whether it's YouTube videos or IG videos. And the pitch is that you would like a video and you'd add a comment to a video, and they would pay you a little bit of money. And so depending on how many hours you do this during the day, you could order, you can make $500 a day, effectively being an engagement farm for somebody. And that will usually come with like a URL, and you're supposed to go to the URL and like register in their portal. Mm-hmm. Right. And I figured, why annoy a single person who's like sort of texting me when I can actually see if I can do something a little bit more interesting. And so I followed the link to the portal where they wanted you to sign up, and I pasted it into my actual like laptop browser, and I saw that it just had a regular form with a post, and they were asking for like, an IBAN number, your first name, your last name, your address, and email. And I thought, okay, well, I know that this is going to get used to build a data set that they will also then turn around and attempt to do identity theft and then potentially try and sell this data set in other places. And so I figured, let's see if we can maybe fuck with their database, right? And so there's a bunch of really standard Python libraries out there to do things like generate random numbers, generate random strings, generate, in this case, Faker is actually a really well-respected library in the Python world for generating test data, right? And so in this case, I had their URL, I had the URI for their form post, and so I wrote some Python to actually generate, 1 million records of fake data. And then, so it generated a fake phone number, a fake IBAN, fake email address, and then just literally set up batches to then batch post all of this fake data to their form. And the actual, and then I just opened this Python script in multiple tabs and then walked away. And my laptop heated up a lot. But effectively, I think at one point I had fallen asleep and I woke up the next morning and like checked my terminal, and they finally got around to actually blocking me after I shoved about 12 million pieces of fake data into their database.
What's the legality of it? Because in essence, you basically, you did what other people would do to actually break a form, to basically overwhelm it with data. Could they come back to you and basically say you tried to hack them, or did you use a VPN? Or
I didn't access any of their systems. I didn't try and log into any of their infrastructure. I literally was using their publicly facing form post and posting data to it. Right. It just so happened to be that data was not real.
The only thing that I was wondering about the code was the batch size thing, but now you explained it. So I was wondering if there's a post limit that you actually reached with that one, but the data wasn't that much. It was just like you wanted to have it in batches so it doesn't send 1 million at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I would have needed it because most of these people are not that smart, right? Like most of these people are not going to go to the point of actually having security in place and doing monitoring and alerting based on like traffic spikes or anything like that. I think that they literally just have it all out there and they're like, we're just going to collect as much data as we can. So I probably could have simplified this and just unleashed it, but I figured I wanted to be a little bit sneaky and see if I could just do it in batches, just in case they had some sort of heuristics that was monitoring traffic spikes or something. But eventually, I guess they did realize that something was going on because eventually they blocked my IP and it stopped at about 12 million records.
It makes you wonder if like the first half hour there was champagne corks in their office where they're all like, so my God, we get so much data right now. Somebody really fell for it.
Like the idealist in me also wants to think that these people had spun up their own infrastructure and were paying for it. And so suddenly their storage bill and their compute bill is going to go up. But the pragmatist and the realist in me knows that these people were probably using a stolen credit card to spin up some infrastructure somewhere. So it's probably not like their wallet was going to get a hit. But in my mind, that these nefarious people woke up the next day and were like, oh my God, we just, our bill is going to be huge, right? So in my mind, the story plays out that they were actually having to pay for this infrastructure themselves. So,
Brian, you say the pragmatist inside of you. My thoughts were I went straight back to the fact that you said you had a punk band years ago, and I just thought the punk never goes, right? Once a punk, always a punk. Because this feels, what's the motivation for this? Is it that you thought these people are wasting other people's time, so I'm going to do it, or is it another motivation?
So I've worked at companies before that have wound up with people reaching out and saying, hey, we've gotten a set of your data and we're going to sell it on the dark web unless you pay us X amount of money, right? It happened at Hewlett Packard. It's happened at virtually every credit card company that's ever existed. And these data sets are actually sold on the dark web for real money, right? But when working with CISOs and security officers and things like that who delve into these kinds of topics, your reputation in these, it's weird, like even criminals have reputations, right? And so your ability to get top dollar for these data sets that you're trying to sell is almost completely based on the quality of that data set, right? So at the very least, there is a data set out there that someone is going to turn around and try and sell, and maybe someone buys it, and that person's going to realize, oh my God, this is 12 million rows of garbage, right? So maybe that person's reputation inside of the data trading economy gets ruined, and maybe that makes them less eager to try it again. These are all the optimist parts of my brain, right? That are saying, I struck a chord for the grandmas out there who won't get a phone call from this particular, scammer in the future. But, in reality, it was a fun little exercise to sort of see if I could do it. And it just had a nice little side effect of ruining someone's day.
It fascinates me just how badly supported that is. I would expect any server that you get somewhere right now to actually have a form that basically gets hammered like that to basically alert you or say there's a spike there. If I had written that thing, the first thing that I would have done is also do a random timeout in between, so it doesn't look like that same IP hammers it every millisecond, but every 2 seconds or something like that to give it a bit of an illusion like a human is doing it still.
Well, I was genuinely surprised that this worked. Right. And when I posted this to some of my friends, they were like, oh, you should have done this. And you should have spun up some VPNs and you should have spun up some virtual machines and run it from different places. And I'm like, guys, it was a Saturday afternoon. Right. And I wanted to spend a few hours to see if I could ruin someone's day. It's not like I'm turning this into a business, so it was a fun little exercise that at the very least, this script can also be used for good, right? You can use this to generate a bunch of fake data for your own performance tests. You can, So it's not like it's a wholly useless exercise, but I'm also not gonna like invest the time to try and make this like undetectable and the ability to rerun this against people, because half the time these scams come with like a Typeform form, right? I have friends that work at Typeform. I don't want to bring down their infrastructure, right? It just so happened that in this particular case, who is against this server indicated that these guys were running their own infrastructure. And so I thought, oh, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Dan and I said, like, you could have had an XSS check and see, like, if you could rewrite their form to post to itself.
Yeah.
So that would be even more interesting, because that could have gone on for days and they had to try to trace where it came from. It ended up there being their own machine. But yeah it's
or put in a sub function to create a record that's like first name drop, last name table, phone number star.
Well, one hopes that it wasn't that way, but yeah. I mean, we just had the new OWASP report out as well, and XSS is still the main thing out there. It seems like I thought that infrastructure would be just very open for that. But I mean, I did this tweet like years ago where I said like rm-fr removes all French files from the server, and people were all going nuts about it and saying like, oh my God, you shouldn't tell people that because they try it out. And I'm like, well, is somebody trying that out without thinking about it has it coming. I'm sorry. It feels...
I mean, there's plenty of highlight film online of like, famous popular streamers who are trying to like work their way through the new hot game. And their chat tells them, oh, you're stuck on that boss. Hit Alt F4 to open up the menu to get to the secret spells. And the person does it like live on stream and crashes their game. And so, I mean, at some point, humans, I think, Christian, you're giving humans a little bit more respect maybe than they deserve.
Oh, wow. Well, with that, I think we're at the end of the show. But it was great having you around, Brian, and it's going to be fun to see if we can do that in the future again as well. I mean, maybe work together on some other bits and bobs, and it would be more interesting to see what the infrastructure stuff that you're doing for the electrical vehicles. I didn't even know. I didn't know where you were. I just thought I'd bring him in because of the past that we had. So I think there was a lot of interesting things we had covered today. I got a lot of stuff that I don't need to put in the newsletter on Friday, but I will have a lot more that I will put in the newsletter. And this was fun. So thanks very much. And thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And thanks for everybody else's time as well. So that was WeAreDevelopers Live for today, 15th of January. I'll see you next Wednesday, and we see you in your inbox on Friday.
Thanks again.